I'm here with Don Price on a lovely summer's day in the Helshoogte Mountains by Stellenbosch, and Don's going to share some more of his recollections of the Rhodesian War. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Don now. Okay, Don, thanks so much for your time, and fire away, you're on camera.
Thank you, John. Yeah, hi. I just want to talk a little bit about some fire force actions and about premonitions and sixth sense. You know, I think during warfare, particularly how it affected me, I was prone to see things before they happened at times, and I'll give you an example of this with one big fire force action that we did. I was based in the Beitbridge area. Roy Makovich, the brigade commander from one brigade, got hold of me, said he was sending down a fire force Delta, to come to us, and one Indep company would be the Fire Force Delta. I was to do KCAR, and we had a day to do the training with our lads, and they all took to it like ducks to water, I must say. And Tom Fulton was one of the guys. He was there, the int officer from brigade. He was there helping us do the training. And then the next day we deployed in support of Archie Moore, who was in the Selous Scouts, working in the Siorka TTL. And we were deployed to Mazunga Ranch, which is part of Liebig's Ranch, the Mazunga section. John and Maury Barkley, John was the manager there, and they were very hospitable to us and looked after all of us. Maury gave us all lunch, which was amazing. I parked off on the lawn, got a bit of a nap, and woke up, and I'd had this premonition, a little dream if you like, and I wanted to just highlight how during a war and during times when your senses are on edge and everything else, you mustn't laugh these things off. You should pay attention to them. Anyway, in the premonition or in the dream, I knew exactly where 20 gooks were, and I thought, well, I must get hold of Roy Makovich quickly and get released from this duty looking after or in standby for the scouts. I phoned Roy on the old crank the handle party line and said to him, look, Roy, we've got a senior, I've got 20 gooks. I know where 20 gooks are at this time, but I want clearance please to take the fire force and get there before we run out of light. He said, well, this is amazing. How do you know this? And I said, well, I can't really tell you. You know, we shouldn't talk about this on the means because it's not very open to everybody, and we better be careful. So he said, no, we'll go, and we'll talk afterwards. So I said, okay. Got the siren going and called all the guys out, and got all the pilots in for a quick briefing. Said it's going to be a very quick briefing. I know where 20 gooks are at this time. They're right there as I'm talking to you. We've got to go now. And one of the smart Alex said to me, well, how do we know this? You know, are we not just going on a wild goose chase, a lemon? And I said, no, we're not. Believe me, I know. I've got it from good authority, and I know where these guys are. And in any event, I'm the senior rank here, and I'm pulling it if I can at this time, and making a joke out of it. So Chaz Goatley was the KCAR pilot, Beaver Shaw was my gunner, and I told the guys the KCAR would lead in the fire force. Low level, we'd go lead us right onto the target area, and we weren't far away. We were about 20 minutes flying time away. So we embussed in all the choppers, we took off, and I said to old Chaz, okay, you take off down the Mazunga River, you keep going. You'll see one river coming in from the right. Leave that, keep going. You see a second river, there it is now. Turn right on that river. Up ahead of us there's a little koppie. You better pull up now because we're going to come under fire. And right then we came under fire. Sure. And like hail from the ground up. And the chopper was hit many times. I just saw the floor between my legs opening up like chocolate paper, you know, tin foil paper just opening up, and these green hornets just whizzing all over the place. Felt a punch in the arm. I was hit in the arm by some shrapnel, and Chaz said to me, Major, you okay? I've been hit in the face with some shrapnel, but I'm okay. I said, I'm fine. All gave him a thumbs up. And right then Beaver said, I've got Gooks visual, KCAR firing, and he started firing. So the punch-up went on, and the KCAR engaged many targets on the ground. We could see all these. It was very exciting, and incoming fire. They fired RPG-7 at us, big circle on the ground as normal. The guys warning us, watch out, you got incoming rockets, and so on, deploying the stops. For me, everything goes into slow motion, and I would then try and speak very slowly, like I'd picked up from the pilots how they used to speak, because it would give the guys confidence on the ground. I'd use the guys' nicknames or first names. Hey Theo, stop 1, move here. Brian, stop 3, move here. Andy, stop 2, whatever, you know, and to try and keep everybody calm and so on. And the fire force action raged, and in the meantime we put in a few strikes with the Lynx. We put in some strikes with the Lynx. We were on target and the whole thing was going extremely well. We were running out of light at this time, and I said to the lads on the ground, okay guys, the last laugh is on me. Chaz and I have been wounded slightly, nothing to write home about, but obviously good for drinks later on. I got a bit of shrapnel in the arm, and Chaz has got some shrapnel in the face. I'm going to leave you tonight in ambush positions, and I want you, stop 1 and 2, to combine together. And I then gave them the details for the evening. There was a bit of whinging. Oh man, you know, they were all so excited. We had at this time killed 16, and I believe the others were in the area. We put in an ambush position that night with stops 1 and 2 over the dead bodies. And before this, Lionel Reynolds, who was our int man, had briefed us that the Gooks were using cowbells, and they were ringing cowbells when they came into a village to stop the dogs barking and also to alert other members in the area and whatever.
Is that where you got whacked in the arm, John?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. That's my big bullet wound. As a result of this, we had bought some kettlebells from the locals in Beitbridge, and we'd given them to each stop. And I thought this is a good chance maybe for us to check out these cowbells. Anyway, at like 1 o'clock in the morning, 0100 hours, I got woken by the camp signaller. He said to me, "Sir, you better come in. These guys have just had a contact in the contact area." And I went and spoke to them. And what had happened was they'd heard these guys coming back, and they were calling comrade, comrade. And our men, my guys on the ground, stop 1 and 2, kept quiet. And when they got a bit closer, then they could hear this bell tinkling. They were using the bell, the cow bell. And they pulled out their bell and thought, big eyes, oh, and they tinkled their little bell. And the two groups got closer and closer together. It was pitch black at that time. When they were about 7 paces away, the call sign opened up on this little group of Gooks that had come back in. The Gooks released an RPG-7 that one of them was carrying, and fortunately it went over the top of their heads because they were all lying down. They culled 2, and subsequently 1 guy got away. I'd put a long stop out the night before when I came back in, and we caught that guy the next morning. Anyway, the end result with the whole thing, and from the premonition that I was telling you about, how we started off 20 Gooks, we had 16 kills on the ground. I forgot to mention we had 1 capture at that time as well. So it was 16 plus 1 capture, 17. And that night we had 2 kills, and the next evening in a stop group at 2 RR was manning for us. We got the 3rd guy. So we got all 20 in the matter of 2 days. And that just, to me, highlighted this thing that when you have a sixth sense and so on, you should follow it, especially during a wartime. A day later, we were sitting in the evening having a sundowner, and we heard an aircraft approaching. It was my friend Robin Watson, approaching in his Cherokee Arrow, and he was coming in. Robin was a mate of Ian Smith's, and Robin was a farmer up in the Seorka, right on the edge of the Seorka TTL. He was a great guy. Robin was awarded the DFC in the Second World War, and he flew alongside old Ian Smith on certain things. Funny enough, he was a farmer in our area, and he was our only air support many times, and he had me write a letter to the Prime Minister. Can you imagine? Young guy, 30 years old, writing a letter saying we needed Robin Watson's plane armed and so on. And Robin had been a professional hunter in Botswana, and he had hunted a guy from the National Guard back in one of the states in California, I think in the US. and who worked in the Beechcraft factory, and he had the blueprint for mounting guns under a Cherokee arrow. So I think Robin just wanted the paper trail to show that we had approached the high up to the top of the line for this clearance, and he got guns. His plane was called for, and we got the guns. Al Smith gave the clearance, and at times Robin was our only strike aircraft, with me sitting next to him pushing grenades out of tube in the floor, and that was our K-car when we didn't have a proper K-car. Anyway, the plane arrived. Robin did a greaser of a landing, as he always did, and came marching in. He was a great big guy, and he said, come on, let's go. I know where some gooks are, we've got to go there right away. Betty, my maid, has just come in, and she's in this village close to Jupempe mountain, and this group has arrived there, and they're in there for the night. They're drinking beer and everything. We must go right away. This was at like 17:30. So I said, Robin, with the greatest respect, we can't get there in time, but we'll plan it for first light tomorrow morning. Oh, and he was humming and hawing. I said, look, have a gin and tonic, and which he did, and then he took off, and I said, fly in a roundabout way so they don't see you. And we put a landline in that night. We put OPs up on Jupempe mountain overlooking the target area for the first light of the next morning, and we got airborne before it was light, and we flew down the road, the main road going to Bulawayo, because without having a artificial horizon, the helicopters have a bit of a problem. So we had to be there, had to time it right. We wanted to be overhead the target area right at first light, and we flew low level on the road to avoid the noise. We were actually blocked with this big Jupempe mountain anyway, and I remember the K-car, old Chaz saying, K-car's pulling up, and we pulled up, and we went over the top of the mountain and came down onto the target area. And as we came down, we caught these guys in bed. They hadn't even sort of heard us. They were totally, the surprise element was amazing. We were right overhead them. K-car started firing. I deployed the stops immediately, stops 1 and 2, and I remember I was listening to Beaver's interview yesterday, and he was talking about how he could see these guys, and I remember clearly seeing the K-car was quite low, and I saw this guy. He had pulled himself into the roots, washed out in this little washed out river bend, and he'd got himself hidden in there, and Theo Nell and his stop 1 were moving up to them, and I suddenly saw this guy, and I saw him raise his AK, and I said, Theo, 11 o'clock, 7 meters, shoot. And he turned and he fired instantly and killed the guy before the guy could shoot him. So it was amazing. The contact only lasted about 10 minutes. We had accounted for the whole gang. Well, in fact, we found out later that one had escaped us. Robin was in the meantime circling off to the south, and very peed off that he couldn't get involved, but there was no time to bring him in for a fixed wing strike with his 3 Oak Brownings. We got 9 guys, and we then moved the 9 to the main road to be lifted by the land tail. And Chaz said to me, sir, let's put these guys against the fence, because the buses were coming in and heading up towards Bulawayo. They'd be coming through the area, and they might even have some gooks on the buses, but the word would get out that we had just had a good contact in the area, and we'd killed some guys who were responsible probably for all the ambushes. So we put these guys against the fence, and when the bus came along, obviously they were very sort of taken back to see the bodies on the side of the road. And one of the pilots, the G-car pilots, and I forget his name now, but he got very cross with old Chaz, and in fact they even got into a little bit of a fisticuffs. Old Chaz was very pissed off with him, and because he couldn't see the benefit of doing this. But anyway, I thought it was quite a good move at the time to show how successful we had been in the area and give these guys a warning order. I wanted to just mention a bit about the K-car communications in the actual K-car, between the K-car commander and the pilot. And this was always worked, the army commander was the senior guy, obviously, but there was always a very close cooperation and close working between the K-car commander, the army guy, and the Air Force pilot flying the machine, and there was a very close bond. and I cannot tell you how this worked and how well it worked. Like when I worked with Chaz, he was an outstanding guy to work with. I heard what Beaver had to say about him as well. But to highlight something about, you know, we talk about KCOR commanders and so on. A couple of times they try to use other officers and other guys from national service, from territorial forces as KCOR commanders when they were pushed in certain areas, and some guys just could not adopt to flying around in a circle or flying backwards for long periods of time. The one guy that actually was related to me, Greg Watson, he was a captain, and he got violently sick in the chopper. So, you know, after a couple of seconds up there during a contact going round and round in circles, he was violently ill and was out of the action. So not everybody could do the KCOR job, and however, I want to tell you that I absolutely loved it. It was the highlight of anybody's time in the army who did action, and like we said before, sometimes we went into action many times. I was back in the Beitbridge area. Things were a little bit quiet when an old friend of mine came across the river to come and see me, Jan Breitenbach. He was Oom Jan to all of us, and he was the CO of 2 Parachute Battalion. It was right at that time that there was a changing of the guards. General Magnus Malone was leaving and going to Minister of Defence, and General Constance Viljoen was coming in, taking his place. Jan Breitenbach had come in with 2 Parachute Battalion. They were based at Mwemwe, down the river, downstream from Messina, big Air Force base. And he came to see me. We were good chumways from the early days. We'd done tracking courses together when he was one recce. And he said to me, I've got a proposal to put to you. I want you to train up our first ever South African Fire Force. And this was really the first time that the South Africans had ever seen a fire force. I know Beaver was talking about training up recce guys that came a bit later, after my time, but it was amazing because Jan wasn't shy about anything. And he said, what kind of aircraft do you need? How many do you need? And I gave him a little list saying this is what we'd use and everything. He said, no, well, we're rubbish. We won't use Alouettes for G-cars. We'll use Pumas. And I'll bring in 2 Pumas. And he also then brought in 2 C-130s for the paras. Right, so the whole stage was set. I took the 1 Indep stop leaders, 2RC Neil Jackson, all the guys, Andy, Arthur Kegel, Theo Nell, and so on down there, and we started training with the 2 Parachute Battalion guys at Madimbo Air Base. And we deployed into 3 different Fire Force contacts. We won't go into them, but I'll tell you that they were amazing. We had 4 KCARs, 2 20mm KCARs, and 2 Dalmatians with a 4-barrel 3.0 Brownings. When they work, they're amazing. They get a lot of stoppages because of the dust and dirt, but you can imagine each gun spitting out like 1,500 rounds a minute. There's 4 guns spitting them out. You put in a 2-second burst into a tree, for example, and if there were gooks hiding up in the tree, as there were in this one occasion, they all fell out like fruit. So a couple of seconds rev. Anyway, we did a couple of big Fire Force drills. There's a great photograph of Theo Nell sitting on one of the Pumas, and an interesting thing that only came to light with me a little while ago when I was having a look at this, is that the Puma on its nose, we'd put numbers 1 and 2, so we could tell the guys on the ground, Puma 1's coming in for you, or Puma 2. On this one, Puma 2, where the number had been put was the aircraft number, and it was Puma 164. Now, Puma 164 was the one that was taken out in the Pai attack, where Joey Deploy was killed with those guys, and I just thought it was really something that that was the actual Puma, and that later we had trained with it and used it in many fire forces, and it was amazing. We had put down 70 guys on the ground in the first wave, and the gooks couldn't react to it. You know, I mean, the first punch up we had, we killed like 25 guys in one time. So it was very good. Unfortunately, Bruce Snellgar was killed right at the start of those joint operations that we did with the South Africans, and I echo Beaver's story there about the South Africans being great guys to work with and great soldiers. when given the opportunity. We had great times with them. I had to leave, unfortunately, and go up for the funeral, and while I was there I was then asked by the CO, Colonel Bates, if I would take over 3 Commander. So I then moved a week later to 3 Commander. Anyway, another story.
Don, just to cut in there, how many passengers does a Puma take?
16 or 12, depending on the ammunition and stuff carried.
Right.
But 16 with no kit and equipment.
Right, okay.
We would do back in our role as Fire Force Delta at Bight Bridge, when Andre Dennison was sent down to me with his Paradak and 16 guys that he was going to loan to me as the para stops. These guys are based up at the airfield. We had a big call out. We went on this huge punch up, and a couple of things happened right in the beginning. That area at Bight Bridge being low altitude, or only 300 and something meters above sea level, aircraft have this problem. At that low altitude, 300 meters above sea level, aircraft suffer from a problem called density altitude. We were very heavy with a full bin of ammunition, 20mm ammo, and a full tank of fuel when we tried to take off from the camp. The pilot pulled the collective. We got airborne. We were about, I don't know, 20 feet off the ground. The weight was too much with the heat and the density altitude, and we just creamed in. And the chopper blades came down and whacked the ground and chopped the boom tail boom off, and we bounced around like a chicken with our head cut off. The pilot telling us all to sit tight, myself and the gunner. And eventually the chopper came to a standstill and the engine sort of stopped, and we were about 6 feet from this big fuel tanker that we had there. So we were very lucky. I had to then run with rubber legs to a G car that I was going to use as the K car to command the Fire Force in, and that's how we went into it. Anyway, back into this big punch up that we had there. The first thing that happened on the ground was quite humorous. It turned out to be quite humorous. We just started the punch up, and there was a blue smoke on the ground, which I think was indicating that somebody was either hit or injured or whatever. And I came on the means straight away and said, "What's the problem?" And they said, "Björn has got a problem. He's got diarrhea and vomiting." Obviously you can't be involved in a contact if you have these problems. So we had to send in a G car to pick this guy up, and we placed him on top of one of these big gomos there, a big granite outcrop right on the top of it, and got back into the punch up. We had a run around with one gook who had an RPD. He was hiding behind this baobab tree, and he kept running around the baobab tree, sticking close to it, and we couldn't get a shot at him. And eventually we did a dummy sort of fake to the left and then came back around the right, and were able to nail him with a 20mm cannon. So there was a bit of humor as well. But then I dropped brought in the Paradak with the 16 RR guys. They hit the ground. I threw them out together. I didn't like to keep guys in the air in a punch up, because I was feeling for them on how they get airsick and so on. And they hit the ground, and I used them as a sweep line. And I must tell you here, this is something that was amazing. The 16 guys from the RAR, 14 of them had MAGs, and only 2, the stick leader in the middle and the one medic, had rifles. So we had this wave of 14 MAGs spewing out 1,200 rounds per minute as our sweep line moving through the area. It was amazing and very, very effective. And we had a great punch up, and at the end of the punch up, so we'd had this great punch up. It was starting to get dark and we were wrapping things up. Guys were bringing the bodies into a central position and so on. We were going to do the mopping up. I left a few corsons on the ground and in ambush, and we were just saying our farewells, and we were just heading out when I heard this little voice on the radio. "Sunray, you've left me on top of the Gomo." And we had to do an about turn and go back there and switch on the aircraft light, and I'd left old Brian Björn on top of this bloody copy, much to everybody's amusement. And of course it cost me a lot of beers, and in history later whenever we're together, old Brian Bian will always say, "Hi, sir, remember when you left me on top of the hill?" And I had to buy him around. So, yeah, but a very good punch-up, and it was interesting with that RR call sign. Okay, I just wanted to tell you guys a little story that the shortest or the smallest follow-up group that I was part of, and my old friend Willem de Beer. Now, Willem was an ex-RLI quartermaster, an ex-CSM, RSM, great man, a fearless guy. Sadly, he's not with us any longer, he's passed. But, and he was, the background, he was chewed up very badly by the lioness that killed Len Harvey in national parks. Willem left the army and joined national parks. Anyway, Willem was that, he'd been all patched up and fixed, and Willem was at Mabalauta as the warden there, and I was there with one Indep company. And we had taken off in a Leopard, one of those mine-proofed Land Rovers with a chassis built on it called a Leopard. And we'd taken off to go and resupply a pump buoy at the one way out pump in the area. Hadn't said anything to the lads, you know, I never knew what old Willem was going to do, but didn't think we were going to be too long. Anyway, we went out there, we resupplied his guy, and on the way back I picked up from the vehicle drag marks across the road and some footprints. So I told him to stop. I got out, I checked it up, and I said, "Willem, looks like from the hair and everything that we've got some guys here who poached a kudu." Of course he went ballistic. "Oh, guys killing one of my animals, you know, you can't do that." So I said, "Well, let's go back and get some guys and we do a follow-up," because they were heading due east to the Mozambique border. He said, no, we haven't got time, we've got to go right away to catch these buggers. So, okay, yours truly was the tracker, and old Willem was the follow-up troop.
Already 4:30 in the afternoon at this time.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, it was like 4:30 in the afternoon. Willem was the follow-up troop. He wouldn't carry an FN. He said he was a civvy now, and he had his 3006 Bruno 3006, 3 rounds of ammo, and his Weaver scope. So off we went as fast as we could go. And we got to the Mozambique border just as it was getting dark. This was quite a hairy place, by the way. This was an area they called the Russian front. Sure. And we could hear this big noise going on, a big pombe on the other side in Mozambique, just across the border. And we snuck up onto them, and in the firelight we could see these guys having there were a couple of males and a lot of females and kids, and they were cutting up the kudu and drinking a lot of beer and everything else. And through his scope, because that's all that we had, and looking into the firelight, you know, the scope illuminates everything very nicely, we could see there was an SKS there. So obviously these guys were gooks, but regardless of that, Willem wanted to arrest them because they were poachers. So he wanted to go charging in there. I said to him, "No, you can't do that, Willem. You're the guy with a scope, you're the guy who can see the targets. I'll go around and do a right flanking, and I'll come out shouting like I've got a lot of guys with me, and I'll rush up onto these guys, and then that's your cue, you come forward." They said, "Okay." But, you know, it wasn't as quick as that because he was an old stubborn bugger and he didn't want to stay there. He wanted to do the assault himself. So I had to convince him that he'd be better placed as our fire support at right angles to me, and I was going to do the assault. So I rushed in there, did all the shouting like I had lots of guys with me. Move up on the right, move up on the left. Okay, you, Himalapa, stop, and all the rest of it. And then I shouted, "Willem, come in." And these guys were totally blown away. They didn't know what was going on, who was there, how many of us were there. And, you know, obviously the element of surprise again was on our side. And I was covering them with my FN. Willem came in. We grabbed some cable ties that we had, put their hands behind their back and tied them up, boppered them up, put a parachute cord noose around both their necks, and we led them out. I was carrying the SKS slung over my shoulder and the FN, and now was the problem to get back to the vehicle because it was dark, there was a bit of moon, and we had a lot of bad country to go through. The stunted Mapani as it is there in that Mabalauta area, and lots of angry elephant cow groups and buffalo and so on.
And it was about a 5K trek in the dark.
It was a 5K trek with yours behind and Willem leading. So we eventually somehow got to the road above the vehicle, walked down the track to the vehicle, bundled the guys in, got back to my camp like 1:30 in the morning. Totally relieved to be back, but just a little story to tell you about old Willem. He was a fearless guy and a great old friend. Okay, in closing, I just would like to say thank you for the guys that have spoken on this program, and I'd like to thank John van Zyl and Hannes Wessels for the great work they've done in showcasing guys' memories of the Bush War. I've been reading quite a few books on different wars in Vietnam and guys in Iraq from the Brit Army and so on, and I think something that came to light that wasn't mentioned in our war, and I think Nigel Henson spoke about it a couple of times, and I think he's right on the button. I think I'm talking about post-traumatic stress syndrome and how this affected guys. And I think that during our war we did a very big injustice to the troopies and soldiers in that fighting, and nobody ever counseled them and spoke to them about the certain actions and big fire force contacts and so on that they had been in. This comes back later on in life to bite you, and over the last 2 years I've noticed with a growing interest is how many guys from the association and scouts and so on have committed suicide. And I'm convinced, reading these books, that this is all to do with this post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I would just like to urge you guys who, if you do have some stories and so on, to come forward, talk about it. I think it's a hell of a good thing to help with this post-traumatic stress, to talk about your actions as opposed to harboring them all inside yourselves. So get hold of John, get hold of Hannes, and let's talk about these things. Don't keep them inside, they're not good for you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Don.
Okay.
Really appreciate your time, bro.
Cheers, man.